Ilya Muromets, who was disabled from birth, spent 33 years by the stove. After a miraculous recovery, the valiant hero vanquished the notorious Nightingale the Robber and dedicated the remainder of his life to serving Prince Volodymyr of Kyiv. So the epic claims. But what really happened? For the first time, the life story of the Russian hero Ilya, who was actually not from Murom. The reasons for his injury and the mystery of his recovery. Why can't he be called a courageous hero? He was a legendary hero during the era of Kyivan Rus, the principal figure amongst the renowned trio of warriors who defended the Rus territories. Ilya Muromets is the victor over a creature named Nightingale the Robber. With one hand, this mighty hero could lift logs that 20 horses couldn't move. In a fit of rage, he could kill his neighbor at the dinner table.
Everyone considered him a legend. However, there is one peculiar fact. In the 19th century, miraculous relics were discovered in the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. They belong to Reverend Ilya Muromets. What is this? A coincidence? Or a prank by the monks? Could the legendary hero exist in reality? After all, he is not mentioned in the annals.
In 1990, a group of scientists from Kyiv were given an unprecedented opportunity to investigate the sacred relics of the cave. These bodies have been preserved intact for nearly 1,000 years in the caves of the Lavra. Visitors who come here to pray are convinced that these deceased possess the gift of healing. But who were they in reality, and why did they gain such power?
Forensic medicine experts explored the near caves of the Lavra. There, they conducted a thorough examination of 54 bodies. Included among them are the relics of St. Ilya Muromets. The results amazed everyone.
He was a tall, strong man who died at the age of 55. It was 1 meter and 77 centimeters tall. 10 centuries ago, a person of such stature was truly considered a giant. But the researchers were convinced otherwise. They concluded that the monk's name does not merely coincide with that of the epic hero, because scientists discovered evidence of numerous battles on the bones of the monk, Ilya.
In addition to the fatal injuries that led to his death, he had numerous... These are fractures of the clavicle and broken ribs, from spear thrusts, saber strikes, and sword blows. Even he could lose an eye.
Experts assert that this individual possessed highly developed muscles, an exceptionally thick skull, and arms longer than those of average people. But what impressed everyone the most was something else. It was revealed that throughout his life, this monk suffered from a severe spinal disease and was unable to walk for an extended period of time.
It was revealed that such a person did indeed exist. He was tall, and he had some problems with the musculoskeletal system. Perhaps this truly validates the version depicted in the epics. Ilya Muromets was immobile until the age of 33. What could have caused the inability to move for such a physically strong and large man?
The director of the Museum of Medicine, Vadim Shipolin, states that initially, the experts hypothesized that the deceased suffered from bone tuberculosis. But after a thorough analysis of the relics, it became clear that this individual had been suffering from polio nearly from birth. This disease caused total paralysis of the legs.
On certain bones of the lower extremities, there were traces of a previous tubercular process. Here indeed are the two main theories explaining why Ilya Muromets was unable to move. And there is no doubt that such a person truly existed. This is not just an epic hero, he is a real person.
Thus, Ilya Muromets, as depicted in the epics, and Saint Ilya, who is buried here, are one and the same person. He lived in Kyiv 800 years ago and ended his life in this monastery. But why isn't he mentioned in the annals? Who hid their real life and why?
In the near caves of the Kyiv-Pechursk Lavra, researchers have discovered evidence suggesting that the monk, Saint Ilya Muromets, who is interred there, and the epic hero are indeed the same individual. But even if Ilya Muromets did exist, why did he suddenly abandon the life of a knight and retreat to a monastery? What reasons prompted the famous hero to never wield the sword again? Until now, the only evidence of Ilya Muromets' existence was in epic tales. Chronicles and other historical documents do not contain a single mention of this name, which is famous in epics, Muromets. Could a real individual have been simply erased from the chronicles of Kyivan Rus due to some transgression? It turns out that in 1788, a devastating fire destroyed all the original books of the Kyiv-Pechursk Lavra. The only reference to Muromets we found was in the miraculously preserved records of the monk from the Kyiv cave monastery, Athanasius Kalnofoysky. They date back to the 17th century, and these are the first credible references to Saint Elijah of Pechursk. The monk wrote, "The people regarded this saint as a giant and a great warrior, in a word, courageous." The term horober or hraber was what they used to call heroes, and the word hero appeared much later. Therefore, brave hero is a tautology, similar to oil is oily or wind is windy. 12th century. Kyivan Rus is torn apart by civil strife, and the state is threatened by a new formidable enemy, the Polovtsi, from its southern borders. These were not tall, yellow-skinned, and cruel nomads. They did not construct cities, nor did they manage farms. They solely engaged in killing, looting, and enslaving prisoners. Russia without bloodshed was an easy target for them. Hordes of Polovtsians are capturing cities and territories, quickly advancing towards Kyiv. At this critical moment, the Kyivan prince summons the Bogatyrs, chosen warriors with exceptional physical strength, to the city. People attributed supernatural abilities to heroes. According to popular beliefs, there were mighty men who rode enormous horses and wielded heavy armor that an ordinary mortal could not lift. After the Polovtsians' attack, dozens of these giants began to converge on the capital of Rus. Among them was a humbly dressed, robust peasant named Ilya Muromets.
According to the epic, Ilya was born in a village near the Russian city of Murom. It appears that the name Muromets itself suggests the origin of the hero, but contemporary scholars have reservations.
The Russian city of Murom is located 1,500 kilometers away from Kyiv. Now, this is a city in the Volodymyr-Volynski region. It is unknown how long it would have taken a person to cover this distance on a horse in the 20th century. However, all the legends state that Ilya arrived in Kyiv within 5 hours upon the prince's summons.
Almost no one, or rather no one at all, knows that there is a small village in the Chernihiv region, 40 kilometers from Kyiv. The village, now classified as an urban type, Morovsk.
Both the small Ukrainian town of Morovsk and the Russian town of Murom now consider themselves the birthplace of the legendary Ilya Muromets. There is nothing surprising in this. 6 Greek cities claim the right to be known as the birthplace of the mythical hero Hercules.
The village of Morovsk is located in the Chernihiv region, about 70 kilometers from Kyiv. But in the 12th century, there was a town here, and it was called Morovisk. There are dense forests and swamps all around, and Kyiv is just a day's journey away. Historians believe that the hero Ilya was actually born here in Murom.
But in modern Morovsk, no one can imagine that 9 centuries ago, a future legendary hero was born here. So, it is quite probable that at some point in the recounting of the story, a mistake happened. Someone didn't hear something and conveyed a modified version. As a result, the hero Ilya of Muromets transformed into Ilya Muromets. Later in the program, have I really been sitting on the stove for 33 years? What ancestral sin caused the newborn boy to inherit the dreadful curse of leg paralysis? middle of the 12th century, Moravia. The stubborn pagans who resided in this town resisted the adoption of Christianity for many centuries. Long after Perun was overthrown in Kyiv, the ancient pagan gods continued to be worshipped in Moravia, until a severe curse befell one of the local families.
Once, Ilya's grandfather, a staunch pagan, in one of the battles, slashed an Orthodox icon with a sword. Legends say that his family was cursed because of this. From now on, all boys in the family will be born with disabilities. The curse started to manifest itself 10 years later when the blasphemer's grandson, Ilya, was born. The baby's legs have been unresponsive since birth.
What didn't his family do? But herbs and prescriptions did not help. The boy grew up strong, cheerful, but entirely dependent. For several days, Ilya sat on a bench, watching the children play outside through the window. In these moments, the boy clenched his fists childishly and promised himself that one day he would bounce back. And it will not be a burden for anyone else. 30 years have passed. An older man was sitting on a bench by the window. He still couldn't stand up and couldn't feel his legs. However, none of his family knew that every day, Ilya rigorously trained his hands with determined grit. He molded clay, lifted heavy chests, and inspected iron horseshoes. He can do anything. His body obeys his every command. However, the legs still belong to someone else.
The truth is, he had paresis or paralysis of the lower extremities. However, it did not completely rule out the functionality of the upper limbs. And Ilya Muromets could train and become quite a powerful person.
Using only the upper limbs.
When Ilya turned 33, he was prepared to accept his destiny for the rest of his life, to make amends at home by the hearth for his grandfather's sacrilege. So what if he felt heroic power in his hands? After all, an adult man remained a helpless child. But everything changed one day, when a peculiar old man appeared near his house.
Travelers entered the house and asked for water. Ilya explained that he can't do it. He can't because he could never manage to do it. But the guests didn't seem to hear him. The elders reiterated their request. This time it sounded like a command. The 33-year-old disabled man almost burst into tears from the insult and suddenly felt remarkable strength in his legs.
From now on, he can walk. Ilya never discovered who the elders were. How did they know about him, and why did they assist him? Modern doctors cannot provide an explanation for this case. The only thing they are certain of is that this man truly began walking only in adulthood.
In the story of Ilya Muromets, an instance of remarkable self-healing is indeed depicted. Perhaps it could have been. Undoubtedly, psychology plays a significant role here. But what actually occurred? We can formulate some hypotheses, and it's possible that modern medicine has not yet attained the level of understanding to explain such instances of self-healing.
When the elders departed, they instructed Elijah to make amends for his grandfather's transgressions, to safeguard the consecrated land from the onslaught of enemies that were descending upon Rus like a storm. The healed Ilya agreed, and then made a vow to the elders to dedicate his life to God. Once on his feet, he tackles the most demanding physical labor. In a day, he can uproot an entire field of massive oak stumps. He effortlessly carries logs on his own shoulders that 2 horses cannot move. The elderly parents rejoice at their son's recovery, but they are most impressed by his extraordinary strength. They had no idea that Ilya had been training his skills for years. Their son will now become their assistant and support. But he did not want to stay at home. Years of paralysis have altered his body. Hands have become extremely strong. These hands are begging for a sword. He recalls the vow he made to the elders to protect the land until the last enemy is defeated, and then devote himself to the Lord. he learned about the dreadful Polovtsian invasion and the prince's summons, he journeyed to Kyiv to earn military honor and protect the homeland. The shortest route from Moravisk to Kyiv goes through a dangerous forest. There, right in the crown of a colossal oak tree, lived a fearsome monster that slew every traveler with its whistle. This creature was named the Thief Nightingale. The legends recount, Ilya Muromets ventured into the forest and boldly challenged the monster to a battle. The nightingale sang so beautifully that the horse under the hero bowed. But Ilya was not scared. The battle between them was brief. Ilya effortlessly subdued the robber, restrained him, and brought him to Kyiv as a present for the prince. But what might this meeting have looked like in reality?
Scientists believe that the legendary outlaw Nightingale could have indeed lived in the forest of Chernihiv, and it was not a mythical creature but a very real person. He is even mentioned in the chronicles. Actually, the thief's name was not Nightingale but Mogut. He ambushed travelers in the forests near Kyiv, but signaled the attack with a whistle.
Perhaps the actual Ilya Muromets defeated him. Like the legendary Nightingale, Moguta was captured and brought to the court in Kyiv. In the epic, Ilya encountered Prince Volodymyr the Red Sun, but the haughty prince took a dislike to the plainly dressed, towering peasant. Instead of the promised reward for the Nightingale the Robber, Volodymyr tosses his worn-out fur coat at Ilya's feet, as if he were a beggar. The hero was visibly upset and started threatening the prince. The guards barely managed to grab him and throw him into jail. Scared, Volodymyr commands that the audacious man be deprived of bread and water for 30 days. Meanwhile, Kiev is besieged by the hordes of the pagan king Kyivan. He demands that Kyiv surrender without resistance and remove crosses from the churches. Otherwise, he will devastate the city, set the churches ablaze, and desecrate the sacred icons with horses. Kyivan threatens to skin the prince alive. Then Volodymyr recalled the hero languishing in prison. He asks Ilya to forgive the insult and defend Kyiv.
So say the ancient Ukrainian epics. However, in reality, Ilya Muromets couldn't have met Prince Volodymyr because he lived 100 years after him. Why did the epics hide it? Who did Muromets actually help to defend Kyiv?
Thus, the epics bridged people from two different eras in time. This is not surprising, as folk tales and fairy tales have been enriched with new historical characters from generation to generation. In epic battles, they frequently joined forces and accomplished their heroic feats together. Thus, the three legendary epic heroes, Ilya Muromets, Dobrynya Nikitich, and Alyosha Popovich, could never have met in reality, as they were separated by 3 centuries. The hero Dobrynya lived in the 10th century AD, and was in fact the uncle of Prince Vladimir the Great. The hero Alyosha Popovich battled Tugarin the Serpent in the 11th century, and Ilya Muromets defended Russia in the 12th. Which prince did Ilya serve? When Ilya Muromets arrived in Kyiv, Prince Sviatoslav, the great-grandson of Vladimir Monomach, was reigning. He could not belittle the hero. Sviatoslav was a wise politician. He attempted to unite the Russian princes against the Cumans. In the initial campaign, spearheaded by Sviatoslav, the Rus triumphed over the Polovtsian forces. They seized a substantial amount of booty and captured the Polovtsian Khan. According to historians, it was in this campaign that the hero Ilya participated for the first time.
Perhaps he even courted some prince's wife. And naturally, he had to participate in all those battles that occurred during the historical era in which he lived.
Ten years have passed in military campaigns. Ilya became a renowned hero, about whom legends started to be crafted. Meanwhile, he himself was in no rush to fulfill the promise he made to his healers. He was not prepared to abandon his secular life for the monastery, as he believed he still had many military achievements ahead of him. But he didn't have much time to fight. In the year 1185, Sviatoslav's son, Prince Igor, rallied his troops for a campaign against the Polovtsi. 7,000 Russian soldiers, under the command of Igor, marched straight into the heart of the Polovtsian territory. They did not know then. This campaign would result in their most brutal defeat in the history of Kyivan Rus. This battle was chronicled by an unknown author in the tale of Igor's campaign.
The decisive battle between the Rus and the Polovtsian nomads. It happened on the Seversky Donets River. Back then, it was known as Kyala. At sunrise, Prince Ihor's forces were surrounded by the Polovtsians. The chronicler writes, "There were so many that dust from beneath the horses' hooves filled the sky." Ilya Muromets was among the warriors who then engaged in mortal combat.
A fierce battle is underway. Ilya is fervently slaying enemies, but the power of the Russians is dwindling. Prince Ihor is injured. The Polovtsians push the Rus to the banks of the Kyala. Elijah is being attacked by several nomads at once. A heavy blow knocks him off his horse. The Polovtsian raises his sword over the hero's head, and then it appears that Ilya has an epiphany. Only now, when faced with death, does he remember his promise to make amends for his grandfather's past sins and dedicate himself to God. And then Ilya mentally pleads with the elders for their help one last time. If he survives this battle, he promises never to bear arms again.
He suffered grave wounds in his conflict with the Polovtsi, forming the basis of the famous The Tale of Igor's campaign. He was seriously injured. And seemingly, this was the reason for his withdrawal from military affairs and his transition to a sacred monastery. He became a monk.
A Russian archer saved his life. But Ilya could no longer recall how the loyal horse carried its rider off the battlefield. The first thing he noticed when he regained consciousness was the crosses on the Lavra churches.
Kyiv Pechorsk Lavra. After the battle at Kyal, an injured man in his 40s arrived here. Near the monastery walls, he released his war horse, removed his armor but couldn't part with his sword.
Hegumen Vasily welcomed the hero at the Lavra. He was not just a monk, but the primary protector of the foremost Russian holy place. The abbot hospitably welcomed the new novice. It was Muromets who assisted the monks in defending the Lavra from frequent attacks. Therefore, the abbot allows Ilya to bring the sword to his cell. However, Muromets immediately assures the monks he will not wield a weapon again, he will never take a life, but he will uphold the vow he once made to the holy elders. He took a vow in honor of the prophet Ilya. He led an ascetic lifestyle in his cell. He did not interact with anyone and never left the caves. In a 17th century manuscript, we found references to the exceptional humility of the erstwhile hero. He made a vow never to raise a hand against his neighbor.
During his time in the monastery, Ilya did not acquire the gift of prophecy and healing. Perhaps his fiery temper and the sword left in the cell were obstacles. Carefully wrapped in a simple cloth, the heroic sword seemed to be biding its time.
Did Elijah really have to die in peace and prayer? The sources from the Chronicles say no. In 1203, the forces of Ovrush Prince Rurik Rostislavovich invaded Kyiv. A great calamity befell the Russian land, a calamity that had not occurred since its baptism. This is how the tale of bygone years remembers these events. The Polovtsians set Podil on fire, plundered St. Sophia of Kyiv and the Church of the Tithes, abducted women, and murdered all the monks and priests. The civilians were mercilessly slaughtered before approaching the gates of the Kyiv Pechorsk monastery. Everyone who was in the monastery joined the battle. The only one who did not join the others was the monk Ilya. From his cell, he heard the echoes of the battle, but Ilya remembered. He had come to the monastery in search of humility and had vowed never to wield a weapon again. Muromets leaves the cell, prepared to bow his head before the Polovtsian sword. But suddenly, he sees Hegumen Vasily. The abbot holds an icon in his hands. With it, he slowly walks across the battlefield to meet the enemy. Then Ilya witnessed the abbot fall and the defaced icon becoming drenched in red from blood.
And then Abbot Ilya broke his promise one last time. He raises his sword to decapitate his enemies with a single stroke, just as in the old times. But suddenly she feels her legs becoming weak. For a moment he sees a mirage, an icon carved by his grandfather, and hears the words of a curse that would cause disability. Surrounded by attackers, Muromets musters his last strength, but he could not stand on his feet. I just felt an enemy's spear strike me in the back.
On that day, all the monks from the Kyiv cave monastery were martyred. Among them was the monk Ilya. He was buried alongside everyone else.
When the monks discovered his tomb half a century later, they were astounded. The body of Ilya Muromets did not undergo decay. The fingers of the deceased's right hand were crossed. It was as if he was shielding himself with a cross. The only thing was that the hero's feet were damaged. Did the curse affect him even after his death?
Scientists still have no explanation for this phenomenon. It is only known that Ilya died from a spear thrust to the heart while defending the sacred monastery. But at the same time, he broke his promise. In the final moments of his life, Ilya Muromets was both a heroic warrior and a monk simultaneously. In 1643, he was canonized as Saint Ilya. This is how the monks hid the truth about the real Ilya Muromets for many centuries. The relics of Saint Ilya are still visited for healing, particularly by people with leg ailments. They do not pray to a legendary hero who became the subject of fairy tales and anecdotes, but to a man who once found the strength to overcome an incurable disease and forever renounce worldly glory.